great to be here. I'm really honored and thrilled to be a part of your work here in Ohio and the important things that you're doing. It wasn't until Jessica did her summary this morning that I really understand now why they picked the four of us to go together, because we definitely complement each other. What I'll be talking about is how do you get kids to be where Stephanie was talking about. And what I'll do to start is to give you some cursor or the thing.
You can click or use this.
Okay. So I'll be talking about the Youth Empowerment Conceptual Framework, which y'all lovingly call the Holden model. And Jessica and Holly have made it clear that most of you know what it is, and so I don't need to spend time explaining the model, but I do want to give you some background about why we did it, how we came up with the model, why we did it, and how we have validated, for the most part, that it really is measuring something that we ended up calling empowerment. But anyway, back in the 1998, you might remember, if you were born by then, the Master Settlement Agreement that happened nationally, where there was a lot of money set aside by the tobacco industry that states were allocated to help pay. It was supposed to offset the health costs associated with tobacco use. States got a lot of money, and they could then decide how to allocate it. But one aspect of the Master Settlement Agreement was to establish a nonprofit advocacy organization that's main goal was to get kids to not smoke. So to try to alleviate initiation and make it so that it wasn't as prevalent. At the time, it was about 22% of kids in the country were smoking. So, and actually, depending on where they were, it could have gone as high as 30%. So Legacy, it was the American Legacy Foundation, located in D.C., and it was to build a world where young people reject tobacco and anyone can quit. So I think I'll use the cursor. So they really focused on kids, and they wanted to create a social movement. They wanted to get people real excited about and against the tobacco industry. So you might remember the Truth Campaign, and that was in 2000, early 2000s. I've got to add here in case you didn't, just to give you a sense of, if you haven't seen an ad or don't remember it, this is what they look like. Before Legacy came along and the Master Settlement Agreement was put in place, I don't know how much you remember, but tobacco smoking was a cool thing to do. And if you watch Mad Men, it was prevalent everywhere in the 50s and 60s, and kids were growing. When I was growing up, it was a cool thing to do if you were out with your friends and all. Most people were smoking, so they really needed to change the whole way of thinking about tobacco, and that was what they used, some cutting edge marketing and things that probably Sue will end up talking about in terms of creative, and really getting at what was important to the kids to hear in order for them to really take a stand against tobacco. And they made it all about taking the tobacco industry and how terrible they are, which obviously that ad did a good job of. So what they did was, in addition to the National Truth Campaign, was they had different aspects of programs that they set up that were trying to get this movement going. One was they had a kickoff of the Truth Campaign in Seattle, Washington, that they then took tour buses that went all across the country, and they were trying to get kids involved, and they would have loud music and all kinds of stuff they were trying to get the edgy kids, the kids that were on the edge of actually wanting to smoke or thinking about smoking, being open to smoking, we call it. And then they had statewide coalitions that were set up, and they decided to fund, they selected 17 states to get to fund a statewide coalition that they could set up how they wanted, but it had to be youth involved. And then they funded them to develop local youth-led programs and groups. So when they did that, that was their way of extending what they were doing nationally. So we're trying to do it from the bottom up and the top down to encourage and increase youth empowerment. So youth empowerment, what exactly is that, right? My job as lead evaluator of what they were doing was to figure that out. So if this worked, then people would have a lot of the things that Stephanie talked about, right? They would feel like they could do this. They would feel like they had the skills to do it, that they knew they had the confidence in themselves to get these things done. But those are all really mushy things to try to measure. So it was a big challenge for us to figure it out. And the way that we went about doing it was to start with the kids. You know, what is it that you want the kids to look like or to be doing if this is working? What are the changes that you hope to see? And Legacy was really interested in those kids. It wasn't so much about community impact or like a lot of funders where they wanted to see changes in, crime rates because the drug use is going down. That's an outcome that you might not get when you're doing a youth-led prevention group. But they were really interested in what is it that the kids are getting out of this, the youth. I probably shouldn't say kids. It's probably not politically correct. So as we were doing this, as you can see, Dilbert talks a lot about empowerment. And when you're thinking about empowerment, it's a whole lot easier to think about what it looks like when it's not there as opposed to when it is, right? It's definitely not that. But, what is it? So we went about a very systematic way of first defining youth empowerment as a process, and then what are the things that influence that process, and what are the outcomes that you would hope to achieve. To develop this model, we went through a lot of different steps. We did focus groups with kids actually all across the country, asking them about the things that were, we talked to kids that were already engaged in youth groups, so they were empowered, opposed to people that weren't even involved in this kind of thing, so that we could get a sense of what the differences were between the youth. We talked to adults who were already coordinating these kinds of groups and what was important in terms of their lessons learned. And we did a literature review, and we involved some experts in the field to help us come up with this model. And basically, it starts with the youth characteristics. So when a youth walks into your group and wants to join, their characteristics are going to define how much they're able to get out of this, right? So, and why they actually came to the door. So sometimes a struggle that adult leaders were having was getting the youth to come in that were the most at risk for using. And that was kind of hard. So they came up with some good recruitment strategies for doing that. Because in our study, a lot of the youth involved tended to be were white, female. They were ranged in age from 13 to 18, and a high rate of them wanted to go to college or planned to go to college. And those aren't necessarily the youth that you want to involve in this kind of thing and get them empowered. So a lot of work that we did, and then I'll talk about later today, was in recruitment and trying to reach out to the ones that are the most at risk, like I said. And what we learned too was that a lot of times the ones that got the most involved were ones that, had a relative that died of lung cancer or had grown up in a household with 5 minutes. Oh my gosh. I told you it was hard to explain this in 15 minutes. Okay, I'll speed up. So that's okay, I'm almost done actually. So anyway, individual participation is at the heart of our model. It seems kind of obvious that participation is the thing, but really it was. I mean, it's all about, when you don't just show up, you participate, you engage, you take on responsibilities, you take on leadership roles, and a big part of what we'll talk about this afternoon, and what I know y'all are working on, is leadership skills. How do you get them to take on? And kids come in with different personalities that are likely to do that. So we looked at different aspects of the group climate, and I was going to tell you some things about what we included. Like a third of our groups that we had 250 groups that we got data from the youth. There were in 13 states, about 2,200 youth. So we have a lot of data from that. There was about 28 groups in each state. There's 17 states, remember, that were participating, but we only surveyed in 13 because of IRB issues. And 25 youth in each group. But the groups were, it sounds a lot like what you guys have set up, where a third of them were located in schools, but the rest of them were in community-based organizations of all different kinds. They partnered with drug action coalitions and that kind of thing too. So we have a lot of stuff about that. And this afternoon, what I'll talk about is really to share some of the lessons learned about the aspects of the model that I just flashed by you, and go through some, think about principles and actions that you can take as an adult leader to get the kids to the point where they're ready. And that's all.